Hi everyone. This is the first in a series I'm calling Let's Study, which is sort of a play off the Let's Play genre of YouTube video. But instead of simply playing through a game blindly or otherwise, we're going to discuss video games more as an art form and sort of join those who are dissecting and discussing the medium more artistically and academically in sort of an effort to advance it more as an interactive storytelling medium as opposed to just sort of mindless entertainment or whatever it was sort of thought of to be in previous generations or what have you. And today, obviously, I'm going to be talking about Portal. And one of the goals of this series will be to ignore outside influence and to study these games in as great a vacuum as possible. So while it's important to look at cultural context for certain titles, I still think there should be thrust to focus in on a game that simply exists in an observable way. It's kind of impossible to look at Bioshock academically without thinking about the work of Ayn Rand, or to look at the Spec Ops The Line without thinking about the American wars in Iraq or Afghanistan or even Vietnam or things like that. But so basically, when I say we'll be looking at games in a vacuum, I mean that here we won't discuss sales figures or sequels or spin-off anime or anything like that. We're treating the game as if it exists on its own merits without additional outside media. Looking at consumer factors when looking at a game in this way is kind of like basing artistic merit of a film or album on sales figures, which is obviously not a good idea. So that's sort of where we're coming from on this. So with all that said, let's study Portal a bit. All right. So what is Portal about? At its most simple and surface level, it's about a young woman who wakes up in this hyper clean building and is at the instruction of an artificial intelligence going through various chambers in an effort to apparently understand human interaction and cognition as it relates to the evidently new technology of portals, or holes that can transport an object from one place directly to another place as sort of a pseudo-teleportation or what have you. We all know what a portal is. So what makes the experience so interesting or profound? For one, it taps into fundamental human gratification, even beyond the dopamine released at the solving of the portal puzzles in the game. Shell, it may be Chell, I'm choosing to call her Shell, the protagonist, and Shell's complete ignorance to her purpose beyond simply doing what the AI is telling her to do. By being in first person and not having any dialogue to shape the player's perception of who Shell is, we're much more easily able to project ourselves onto her. And our only motivation, and thus Shell's only motivation, is one of purpose and curiosity. If the game simply puts us in a room and has us solve these portal puzzles, we might grow bored considerably faster. But because there's a voice compelling us, egging us on, and in places even comforting us and making us laugh, we're drawing the conclusion that there's more to this than meets the eye. And so what Portal has done by setting up this ironically elementary-looking scenario is connect with a fundamental human condition. We wake up every day, alarm clock by our bedside, toilet nearby, and then after that, we exist to discover. We learn so that we can progress in the hopes that someplace in the future, however far, we can fully understand where we're supposed to go, why we're supposed to go there. It's a very fundamentally human compulsion. Now, as the story progresses within Portal, it becomes evident that there is, as we would hope, a more suspect and more complex plot going on rather than simply solving puzzles for the sake of solving puzzles. Shell discovers that she's not the first to endure these puzzles, and that previous occupants, or even just one occupant, I don't think it's ever explicitly stated in the game, went mad or failed to endure the exercises and trials that to this point Shell has been successful with. These moments, they sort of represent some really good environmental storytelling. There's no exposition dump. There's no mystery solved for the player earlier than it's required to be solved, and we aren't told how Shell responds. We're shown, not told. Shell responds as we do, in that the game doesn't force her to respond to these new developments at all. Shell only responds because we respond, because the game is that adept at allowing us to project ourselves onto her. And as the plot progresses, the environments begin to sort of peel. They sort of begin to contrast. Shell finds herself in much more dingy areas representative of GLaDOS, the antagonist. They're very whitewashed on the outside, very sterile, but underneath they're rotting and sort of terrifying and uncomfortable. And they've been neglected or abandoned. And the observational rooms that appear in test chambers are much more noticeable. They're also abandoned. You get the isolated sense that Shell and this AI are the only ones still in the building. Maybe the only two entities still in existence, depending on what's sort of going on. And it's not, if not for the game's well-timed humor and the brightly lit environs, Portal could probably honestly be considered a horror game, or at least a suspense type thriller. But it does have that. It has humor, and this humor is one of a number of important ironies and foils that the creators of Portal included between the game's two primary characters, Shell, and her antagonist counterpart, the rogue AI, GLaDOS. Shell is a human being, GLaDOS is a machine, but the game puts them in a number of antipodal positions on purpose. Shell doesn't speak, she doesn't show outward emotions, her actions are extremely mechanical and calculated, whereas GLaDOS, with mixed success, communicates and expresses jokes, fears, anxieties, very much like a human being would. Shell spends the entire length of the game calculating, processing, problem solving. GLaDOS, I guess paradoxically, spends the game failing to understand Shell, failing to understand survivalist human nature, being baffled with it, and Shell's place as sort of this anomaly of triumphs and victories and determination, and a set of tests and exercises where others have failed or gone mad or perished altogether. And GLaDOS often becomes petty. She insults Shell's weight at one point, she discourages her, she lies to her, she attempts to be deceitful, even though by definition her mechanical nature should put her above these sorts of interactions and quote-unquote feelings, very human qualities. And these interactions between the two, these manners in which they play off one another, is what makes them so subtly hilarious as well as very endearing. Typically, protagonists and antagonists at their most basic are just opposites of one another, and that's sort of that, whereas Shell and GLaDOS aren't just opposites, they actually complete one another. They can't see how the other reflects themselves, but that doesn't matter. The important thing is that we can, as the audience. And beyond that, Shell to me is a very transcendental figure. GLaDOS is supposedly, within her world, very omnipotent, very supposedly all-powerful. She comes off as gentle and guiding in the beginning, but it's apparent later she's actually extremely vengeful, extremely spiteful. She puts Shell on a path she cannot escape or control without sort of playing along. But ultimately, Shell will actually, the end result of that path is just to be burned alive. And I don't want to upset anybody, but if that sort of trajectory sounds familiar, you're sort of on the right track with what I'm thinking here. Shell, in this way, can be looked at as a very empowering figure for the player. Through her eyes, in her shoes, you could say, we use our own ingenuity to circumvent this punishing predestination and expose GLaDOS as she really is, which is out of control, short-sighted, and maybe most crucially as a weak character, a character with exploitable, profound weaknesses. And all this deserves a lot of credit for being about elegance over spectacle. I think an overblown budget, an oversized creative team probably would have botched this game entirely. And the game works very well because it doesn't try to be more than it is. It's very elegant in presentation. The difficulty progression is very masterful, which is a sign the game had a great testing team. And That alone, without story, honestly, may not have had the same impact on the player, but it would still probably be a competent game. The game also understands pacing. The countdown in the room when the game begins, with Shell looking at the clock after she wakes up, starts at just the right number. It makes the player wait excitedly, makes the character anticipate, but it does not just make the character wait for the sake of making a character wait. And the conclusion of the game, I guess you could say, is interesting because it shows that in some way GLaDOS has made do on her promise in some way, being that the cake technically exists, though GLaDOS doesn't necessarily understand any intrinsic reason we enjoy it or strive for it. And I guess the cake is a great metaphor for GLaDOS's complete lack of human understanding, at least in Shell's case. Nowhere does it remotely feel true that we're continuing on because we want the cake. She understands our connection to other things and her assumption that the companion cube somehow means anything to us. Though I guess it's important to show that it was displayed that it meant something to the prior test subject that scrawls on the walls and sometimes guides us / Shell through the game. But all of it doesn't stop GLaDOS from concluding the adventure, as it were, with a song. The song is the perfect ending to Portal, as it's very happy, and it's a pleasant allegory to Shell and GLaDOS as we know them. It's simple and joyous, but it's also sung by a robot, the robot. It's folksy, it's acoustic, but it also has synthy sounds, electric lines, much more musically, at least tonally, it sounds a little more futuristic in places as well. Portal, to me, ultimately, I guess, isn't just a study of the questions we have about our own future, our role in the technology that will occupy it alongside us. To me, it's an important reminder that the technology is already a part of us. There's already something human about it because we're the ones that created it, and there's also something technological about us because, somehow, some way, we were created or came into being through some circumstance, or however you want to look at that. Which one ultimately triumphs over the other isn't particularly relevant because we complete one another all the same. It takes different forms, it evolves, but right now it's, whether it's smartphones or television or computers or it's as simple as discovering fire, the wheel, we're always both surviving and communicating humanity alongside technology. We're both petty, but we're also both very calculating. We're both angry, but we're also very methodical. We don't just have Shell inside us, we also have GLaDOS, and no matter where the portals take us or to what end we're using them, I think that remains an important realization about human nature. So anyway, I guess that concludes my thoughts on this game. Thanks for listening to me bloviate pretentiously about it, and if you'd like to visit my stream to discuss any of these points, or to just hang out and laugh with me and my friends, we do speedruns, we game casually, and but it's a very chill environment. It's a very welcoming Twitch channel as far as having some background noise in the gaming sphere for your life. So I hope somebody took something away from this, even if it was just a few minutes of simple entertainment, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace and progress.
I have your brain scanned and permanently backed up in case something terrible happens to you, which is just about to.